Hello, shalom, and welcome to this episode of Congressional Conversations, where we discuss the priorities of New York's Jewish community with members of the New York Congressional Delegation. I'm your host, Michael Miller, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, JCRC-NY. Today, hailing from New York's 16th District, we are pleased to be joined by Representative Jamaal Bowman. Representative Bowman, a freshman in Congress, serves as the vice chair of the House Committee on Education and Labor, on the subcommittees on early childhood, elementary and secondary education, higher education and workforce investment, and the subcommittee on civil rights and human services. He also serves as the chair of the subcommittee on energy. Welcome, Representative Bowman.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Let's first start, as I do with many of my guests, trying to find out who it is that we're seeing on our respective screens. Can you tell us a little about your background, your upbringing, your career in education? You serve on the committee in Congress dealing with education, and what you hope to achieve as a member of Congress.
Sure. So I was born and raised on the Upper East Side, East Harlem section of New York City, born in 1976. So I'm a 70s, 80s, and 90s baby, raised by a single mom along with my three sisters. Went to public schools my entire life, raised during a time where we had both the AIDS epidemic and the crack cocaine epidemic really impacting the entire world, quite frankly, but really communities like mine, and impacted my family pretty personally. But went to public schools my entire life. I was a pretty outgoing kid. I would call myself a street kid. I was outside all the time in Manhattan. You know how it is growing up in New York, playing street games. Was an athlete growing up, played basketball, football, and ran track. Played football in high school in New Jersey, where I graduated from college, where I lived with my father, and then played football in college, to continue as I continued on. And right after college, I got into education. It was not a plan. I went to school for sports management, which is business administration with an emphasis on sports. Came out, and corporate America didn't really feel like the comfortable place for me at the time. And I had a friend whose mom was a teacher, said, hey, take a look at education. And I went to, first you got to go get fingerprinted at 65 Court Street. That's the process. You go to Brooklyn, get fingerprinted at 65 Court Street, and then you go district to district, trying to get a file number so that you can get hired and get a job. And I went to a job fair in the South Bronx, District 9. The principal took one look at me and asked me if I was ready. I said yes, and she said, "You're hired." It was a huge teacher shortage then, and it's a teacher shortage now too, still pretty much on the national level. But I got hired. I got to the school, and I fell in love with it right away. I mean, I fell in love with teaching, and I spent 20 years in education. I was an elementary school teacher, a high school guidance counselor and dean of students, but I also taught classes. And I ultimately became a middle school principal when I opened my own middle school in the Northeast Bronx, before running for Congress and winning, and now having the honor of serving as the vice chair of Ed and Labor. And, when you ask about our priorities, it begins with education. And I hate to sound cliche, but I think education is sort of the holy grail of what we all need in this country and what humanity needs overall. I think we've been separated and segregated and educated differently for far too long. And I think that's what leads to the continued conflict, both here and abroad. But it begins with education, but it doesn't stop there. It moves to affordable housing. It moves to universal health care. It moves to workforce development and job training. It moves towards environmental justice, humane criminal justice, and immigration reform. It's pretty much a human rights agenda. And in whatever way that looks, whatever I can do to help improve the quality of life of everyone in the district, I'm going to try to work to do that in collaboration with others. So far, so good. We're off to a good start.
Thank you very much for getting to know you. I'm sure our viewers appreciate that as we get into some of the issues that you're going to be wrestling with in Congress and that we're all wrestling with during this current period. And that central issue, of course, is COVID. The pandemic has been a huge influence on everyone's reality for over a year now. Given that your district contains a great diversity of New Yorkers from different races, religions, and economic situations, can you share with us how COVID-19 has affected your district in the Bronx and in Westchester?
Yeah, it's been really tough. Our district was pretty much the epicenter in the beginning. New Rochelle was the first designated case, and the gentleman who was diagnosed in New Rochelle also did an event at SAR High School right here, also in the district. So SAR High School had the first outbreak here in Riverdale, and then New Rochelle had a simultaneous outbreak. And from there, it kind of spread throughout the city, throughout the state, and made New York sort of the leading state with the most cases. So it hit us pretty hard. And then it moved toward communities of color with high percentages of senior populations. So places like Co-op City, Wakefield, Edenwald, Yonkers, Mount Vernon were hit very hard by COVID very, very early on. And then because of the slow response from the federal government at that time, we had nurses who were struggling, people didn't have PPE. So it hit us very hard. I'm happy that, a year later, our highest need communities have vaccination sites. We worked really hard to fight for them, but then work in collaboration with the White House, the governor, state elected officials, city elected officials, New York City mayor, to get 4 vaccination sites in our district. So we have one in Yonkers, one in Co-op City, one in Mount Vernon, and another in the Wakefield section of the Bronx, the highest need area. So we're happy about that. We're still pushing and encouraging people to please get vaccinated. Please wear your mask because we're not out of the woods yet. And there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation around vaccines that we're trying to debunk. And that's why I made my own video getting vaccinated because I wanted to, hopefully encourage others to do so. And on the video, I articulated the fears. Like I understand the fears with regard to vaccinations and with regard to how the Black community interacts with the healthcare system. Our country has a pretty sordid history there. So I get it, but we got to get vaccinated. It's not only going to save your life, it's going to save the lives of others as well.
Yeah, and you're thank you for that. You're in the education field, and of course, the school that over which you served as principal is probably, or for most of this past year, has been working virtually. Tell us a little bit about HR 1904 and what role that will play in providing opportunities for your constituents to be educated.
Yeah, so this is about access and opportunity. Right. So what we saw very early on is, kids from low income communities and disproportionately kids of color did not have access to not only Wi-Fi and broadband, but did not have access to hardware. So cities, states, the entire country had to do a lot of fundraising and move around a lot of resources to make sure kids had the hardware they needed to access remote learning, and then make sure the Wi-Fi was a part of that. But even with having the hardware, the Wi-Fi still left a lot to be desired. And that's why we introduced the Broadband Justice Act this year in Congress. And we're working with Representative Cleaver and others to hopefully make sure broadband's a part of the infrastructure package that's going to be coming as part of the American Jobs Plan. And that would provide broadband to 8 million additional people, both in rural and urban communities across the country that have access to federally subsidized housing. But we want to get kids back into the classroom. That is the key focus. We need them back into the classroom, in-person learning by September. We need more teachers and teachers' assistants so that we can lower class size and give kids the individual and small group instruction they need. And we need to bring back more experiential learning so that kids are doing more of their learning outdoors, exploring nature, and really understanding the science and civics of nature as they go back to learning.
Yes, that's also critically important, particularly with young folks who are so impressionable. The second piece of legislation that you've introduced is the Care for All agenda. And this resolution was co-led by you, and on the Senate side, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and supported by 80 or so organizations, centers on the care economy as the foundation for our economy in the United States. So what inspired you to make this one of your first pieces of legislation?
Well, my experience in education, children and families who have been marginalized and realizing self-determination and truly self-actualize. But also on the personal level, working with, dealing with was what my mother has been going through over the last year. Unfortunately, my mother passed away from COVID complications on Valentine's Day. But prior to that, she was struggling with kidney disease, kidney failure, and some cognitive issues. And just going through that process and learning how just disorganized and under-resourced our healthcare system is, particularly for our seniors, was something that was just eye-opening to me. So the Care for All agenda and our Care for All resolution is to make sure that we provide exemplary home-based care to our seniors, to make sure that they can live and age gracefully and with dignity, to make sure we provide early childhood and universal child care to our babies and our children, to make sure they enter our school system ready, willing, and able to thrive, to make sure we hire more nurses and more teachers in our healthcare system and in our education system, to make sure we're caring for our children. But it's also about self-care. It involves mental health. It involves physical self-care. It also involves care for the environment, and care jobs. The care jobs of the 21st century are non-carbon jobs as we move away from our dependence on fossil fuel. It's also reorienting how we think about our immigration system, looking at it from a care perspective, our criminal justice system from a care perspective, our economy and our financial system from a care and well-being perspective, as opposed to the hyper competition, which has led to the destruction of the environment and much of the destruction that we experience within the human race.
Wow, that's a fascinating orientation. So let's now shift away from healthcare and education to law enforcement. And in the wake of January 6th and the insurrection on Capitol Hill, you sponsored and introduced HR 276, the Congressional Oversight of Unjust Policing Act. And the act hasn't passed, but please explain to us how it informs our understanding of the links between some, I would suggest, a few members of law enforcement and the white supremacist groups.
Well, when January 6th happened, thank God I wasn't in the Capitol, but I was in my office not too far from the Capitol. And I'm watching it unfold on the screen in the same way people are watching at home. And the first question I had was, how the heck were they able to breach the police?
Right.
How were they able to breach the police? How were they able to get into the Capitol? And why wasn't there more resistance? And that just led to a ton of questions. And it immediately made me think about the Black Lives Matter protests that happened the summer of 2020, where the resistance was vigorous and robust and very aggressive and very violent, even though the majority of the Black Lives Matter protesters were peaceful protests. So just contrasting the two just led to a lot of questions. And I began to wonder, are there connections between white nationalist individuals and groups and Capitol Police? Going a step further, are there connections between white supremacists and the Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security, and other police departments across the country? And lo and behold, the FBI already had data that shows there are connections between white nationalist groups and individuals and law enforcement across the country. So the coup act looks to form a commission that examines that relationship. And although it has yet to pass Congress, the idea to form a commission to study exactly what the heck happened that day has been taken up by Speaker Pelosi and others. And we're excited about, a commission being formed and us asking and wrestling with these very difficult questions, because we can't have a justice system that continues to disproportionately target Black and brown people and treat white perpetrators different than Black and brown perpetrators. We cannot continue to have that and call ourselves a democracy.
That's again a very important issue that needs to be investigated, and I hope that Speaker Pelosi really dives into that, and that the investigation is conducted arrives at conclusions that address the questions directly. One of the questions, of course, that we have is why we, as members of the Jewish faith, are targeted. And as you very well known and put out a very powerful statement in this regard, there have been several distinctly anti-Semitic acts of vandalism within the Riverdale part of your district over the past 2 weeks or so. The throwing of rocks through windows, multiple synagogues, a private home, a shed behind the conservative synagogue was broken into, and the prayer books and Bibles were desecrated. Why do you thank God a perpetrator has been arrested? We thank New York Police Department for doing what it has done. But why do you think this is all happening? And what can you do as a legislator to make sure that people feel safe in their own communities and in their houses of worship?
Well, I have to continue to speak truth to power on the issue of fighting back against anti-Semitism and fighting against hate in all its forms. I've done that throughout the campaign. I've done that since I've been in Congress. I will continue to do that. I also believe it's my job, and I think it's all of our jobs, to educate people on the Jewish community, on humanity, on how we are much more alike than we are different. And that's a key piece, because a lot of people learn about other cultures and other religions from social media, from YouTube, and from sources that are not credible. And as a result of that, they behave in ways that are just hateful and evil, and seek to cause harm to others, even though they don't understand that the others that you try to cause harm to are peaceful and just want to live in peace with their family and contribute to society like everyone else. So education is a big part of it, and we can do more in our schools to provide an anti-hate curriculum so that we can learn more about each other and begin to live and engage with each other a lot more. There's not enough of that. And I believe as we fight against anti-Semitism, we have to fight against racism and sexism and xenophobia all at the same time, because we all have, unfortunately, because of this caste system that has been designed around us, there's this sort of perceived hierarchy of race and religion and class that we have to denounce completely and begin to work together and learn together as a human race. So, I will use my platform to continue to educate, speak truth to power, but then continue to organize people across diverse communities, whether it's religion, class, race, or gender, so that we can be leaders in stopping hateful acts against one another in our communities.
Have you been giving any thought to potentially building coalitions of that nature within your district?
Yeah, we already started. Yeah, we've already gotten the ball rolling with that. I mean, we were blessed during the campaign. We had a diverse coalition across the district really support us and help us to cross the finish line. And now we're beginning to rebuild that coalition and grow it and begin the difficult conversations of learning and understanding that will take place. I believe we have our first event coming up this Saturday with regard to this. So yes, we are already in the process of doing so.
Good, and hopefully we can hear more about that. One of our senior staff members, Rabbi Bob Kaplan, lives in Riverdale, is one of your constituents, and he's our community organizer. So we'd very much like to tap in to whatever coalitions you're going to be working on. Let's shift now to the overseas agenda, and particularly the issues surrounding Israel. You've repeatedly stated that you support a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and that you oppose the BDS movement against Israel. We're in full agreement on that. Mm-hmm. While we agree with you on that, we are dismayed to learn that you have signed on to Representative Betty McCollum's bill attempting to place restrictions on U.S. military aid to Israel. According to the Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU negotiated with Israel under the Obama administration, 100% of U.S. military aid to Israel is required to be spent on purchasing U.S.-made military equipment here in the United States. History has shown that Israelis are more likely to make concessions for peace when they know that their qualitative military edge allows them to protect themselves from the very real threats of terror, such as the dozens of missiles that were raining down and still rain down on southern Israeli towns, and the nearly 150,000 rockets that are in Hezbollah's arsenals in Lebanon, and of course the tens of thousands of rockets that Hamas has in Gaza. Why would you seek to put Israel in a weaker position to achieve real peace, Congressman?
Well, just a point of clarification. The bill doesn't seek to condition aid outright. The bill calls for more transparency in terms of how the aid is being used, particularly with regard to the detaining of Palestinian children. So the bill does not look to condition aid. So I just want to make that point of clarification. Secondly, the safety and security of the Jewish community overall and the people of Israel is an utmost priority of mine and will remain an utmost priority of mine. And my decision to sign on to this bill was not in a vacuum. It was made in consultation with many within the Jewish community within the district who also supported the bill. In order for us, they believe, and I believe as well, to get to a true two-state solution, we have to have honest conversations about what's happening on the ground to ensure the long-term safety and security of Israel, of the Jewish community, and of the Palestinians there. And I believe we have to have conversations about both. How do we ensure the safety and security of the Jewish community in Israel, and how do we ensure the safety and security and the humanity of the Palestinians in Israel? And I think honest conversations about what's happening, transparency around how our aid is being used will take us one big step closer to a true two-state solution, which we've been far apart from for my entire life, even though I've been hearing about it throughout my life.
Well, on behalf of the JCRC, we're very pleased that we're having this conversation, and having conversations, I think, is really critical and key prior to signing on to pieces of legislation such as the McCollum bill. Mm-hmm. And I hope that through this conversation and others, we can share views that sometimes we're going to agree upon and at times we're not going to agree upon, but at least sharing information, I think, is critical. And one of the pieces—
Can I say something about that? That's such an excellent point, because ever since we signed on to the bill, we've had amazing conversations with a plethora, with the robust and diverse Jewish community within the district. As you know, the Jewish community within the district is very diverse, and although we spoke to many prior to signing on, we didn't speak to everyone. So we've had great conversations since the signing on to this bill, and during those conversations, the conversation of Palestinian pain has been a part of those conversations. And I think we need to continue to have them because I think that's how we ultimately learn from each other, develop more empathy and compassion, and really move forward.
Right. I agree once again in regard to having the conversations, and also, by the way, also having conversations with the Israeli consulate
Yes.
representing the state of
And
Israel.
we've done that too. We've done that a few times.
Right. I'm aware,
Yeah.
and those are really crucial. It's one thing to hear it from us who are advocates, another thing to hear from those who are impacted by legislation in Congress, even if it's legislation that's proposed and is not passed, and is really collecting as much information as one can collect. And I hope that moving forward, we can have a more open level of conversation on such issues. As an example, there are 70 or so organizations that are supportive of the McCollum bill, and overwhelmingly, there are organizations that are leaders within the BDS movement that you oppose, and many of these organizations actively oppose a two-state solution, and some have even printed anti-Semitic supersessionist material. I assume that these are not groups with which you seek to ally yourself. Am I right?
You are absolutely right. I do not seek to align myself with those groups. Unfortunately, we've co-sponsored almost 200 pieces of legislation, and there are groups on all of those pieces of legislation that we may agree with some things, but with many things we may not agree with. And this piece of legislation is one of them. I do not align myself with those groups. I do not support the BDS movement. I do not support the eradication of Israel. Israel has a right to exist. It has a right to its homeland. It has a right to self-determination. And I'm here to support that right. And even though it may not look like it on the surface with this bill, I believe that conversations, the bill begins conversations which will lead to the ultimate safety and security of the people of Israel. So you're right. I do not align myself with those organizations.
Oh, thank you. And what about someone who asks you about travel to Israel? There have been criticisms leveled at elected officials who travel to Israel. JCRC has sponsored over 100. I've led 100 missions to Israel with many elected officials and community leaders. If whether you are invited or somebody to ask you as to whether they should go on a trip to Israel, what would you tell them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, how can how can we have real conversations if I've never been there, right? So I'm looking forward to going. I'm hoping that as soon as COVID is lifted, I'm able to go, and I encourage other people to go. First of all, I like to travel, so I'll travel anywhere as long as I get to learn about other people and other cultures. But yes, I'm excited to go, and I would encourage other people to go as well.
Well, thank you very much for that. That has been a controversial issue, and I'm very pleased that you are supportive of travel to Israel. And there's so much to see in that beautiful and amazing country. So let's just talk about the general Jewish constituency within your district. We've talked about it a little bit, but strengthening those relationships. I'm really pleased to find out that you are a active member of the Black Jewish Congressional Caucus. Our relationship with myself, JCRC, is just beginning with you and your team. But how can we work together in order to build a community together? That is not just, we've seen too much separation, too much polarization. What can be done, particularly from your perch, from your bully pulpit to a certain degree, in order to try to bring the community together and to work together?
Yes, not to sound like a broken record, but once again, it's education. I think the dialogue is helpful. I think what's taught in our schools is helpful, and education on our shared history is also very helpful. The Jewish community was a major part of the civil rights movement in this country. The Jewish community was very supportive and influential in the establishment of the NAACP. We continue as two communities to have to fight back against anti-Semitism and racism and deal with persecution both in the present and historical. So I think that those shared experiences, those shared struggles and that shared pain gives us a common cause to come together, learn from one another, and work together. And I believe we have a shared enemy. And I usually don't use words like enemy because I believe we're a human race and we should work together as a human race. But the idea, in my opinion, of white nationalism and white supremacy is one that I think harms and kills all of us. I mean, I believe we had a white nationalist in the White House for 4 years who, because of his over focus on that ideology, allowed a pandemic to ravage our communities that our communities are still recovering from. And then when you look at the issues politically, issues of elder care, issues of housing justice, issues of education justice, issues of human rights. I know these issues are important to the Jewish community as well. So it's about a shared knowledge and shared understanding and being open to having honest conversations and growing and learning together that will make those things happen. And as I mentioned before, speaking truth to power on those issues and using the bully pulpit, but also using legislation and advocacy where necessary can help bridge those gaps and create stronger communities overall.
Well, I'm very hopeful that moving forward, the community will be more brought together and rather than drawn apart. This has been a really fascinating conversation that we've had, and I'm very grateful that you came on to this program. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to leave with us, Congressman Bowman?
No, this has been great. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to continue to engage in dialogue and mutual understanding. And yes, because of the world the way it is now, post-Trump and QAnon and all of the divisions that are there, we often go into our corners in self-preservation, and that's completely understood. But I hope that we can open our arms and literally hug each other and engage in solving the world's problems together, because we have big problems that if we don't solve together, the problems will consume us all. So I just look forward to doing that work with your entire audience and their family and friends, because we got a lot of work to do.
Thank you, and thank you for this conversation. We're very pleased that you joined us, and to our audience, thank you as well for watching. To learn more about some of the issues we discussed today with Congressman Bowman, you can check out JCRC-NY's 2021 Focus on Communal Priorities. It's available on our website, jcrcny.org. Again, jcrcny.org. See you next time on Congressional Conversations. Thank you again to Congressman Jamaal Bowman from the 16th Congressional District. Shalom, goodbye to all. Thank you for viewing.